Morning to all of you. First correction is I'm not a doctor, so that kind of just sets the tone. So you can ask me questions which are not really PhD related. So Pooja mentioned to me, I think a couple of weeks ago, if I could speak on intrapreneurship. And fortunately, we could find a slot, and we actually figured out that this may be a very important topic as India grows from where it is to where it is expected to grow. I just got back from Delhi last night after a few discussions with the ministry. And there were a couple of areas where the government was very, very concerned about, which was really with respect to environment and how environment can actually throttle the growth. And as we discuss this whole strategy of how India will actually grow over the next 10, 15 years, a case in point that was being made is where could India really develop in terms of growth over the next 5 to 6 years? What could be the estimate from an industry standpoint, from a growth standpoint, of what India could be? And there were numbers that were being discussed, which could range from $500 billion to all the way to $1 trillion. That could be the incremental growth that could actually get added as a country in various fields, dimensions, and markets. And this was really from a traditional model of saying, yep, the consumption of the middle class is going to increase, the purchasing power is going to increase, there are going to be multiple kind of interventions that are going to come in, the government is doing a lot of stuff, so you would have fundamentally a consuming class which is young, which could go from, the incremental growth could be anywhere between $500 billion to $1 trillion. And when you actually put that in perspective over the next 5 to 6 years, where you have a challenge of the environmental degradation, sustainability, other issues happening, and there is this huge opportunity which is on the other extreme of saying, yeah, the growth could be in this kind of shape and form. How is the industry, the society going to cope with it? So there was a lot of debate and we discussed, and on the whole, it came out that, okay, there may be a set of technologies that this country is going to look at, given all the kind of metrics that we have seen over, let's say, the last 10 years. Ever since our economy got actually liberalized, the kind of stuff that's happened, the kind of technologies that have actually come into the country, the kind of technologies that have got built. Generally, the assumption was there are a set of areas which will actually drive or become the facilitators to this growth. And as we discussed, and I started scribbling actually on my way back yesterday on the flight, what could these technologies be as we actually look at in the future for an emerging economy like India, what could happen? Now, the reason I'm giving you this background is because this is what will dovetail into, I'm sure a lot of you are from organizations. Is the current model of running an organization even sustainable in the future? And that's the question we all need to address. The traditional model of saying, I'll go to the market, I'll take a product, I'll drive the product into the market, I'll expand the market using my product, how good it is or how bad it is, I'll get some share out, may not be the model in the future that really becomes applicable for at least India and probably even globally. Because no longer is this whole option of what we did over the last 30, 40 years of suggesting that, okay, we developed a product, let's kind of put it into the market, let's go get some share, let's beat the hell out of competition, we'll do it. I don't think so that's really going to work in the future. And given the new generation of people coming out from colleges, institutes, etc., this whole process of thinking will probably need to be changed. And that's where I think corporates, organizations will have to think through a different mode, a different process of saying what is this whole game about intrapreneurship within the organization. And that's why I wanted to connect this, the larger story of the growth, to what needs to be done within organizations in the future. And I'm sure all of you have this experience over the last many years of what are the technologies that have actually kind of either fired up, facilitated the growth. And also there's always this discussion and debate by saying, you know what, there's one Bharat and there's one India. The Bharat doesn't understand a lot of stuff that's happening, but India understands. India will move forward and Bharat will be left behind. And I don't think so that's true any longer. If you really look at technologies today, whether it's in the financial space, whether it's in the digital space, whether it's in any other space, the rate of absorption of technology in the country is probably one of the highest in the world. I mean, I was just looking at the metrics. After Indonesia, a small country, India is probably the number 2 adopter of technologies. There are about 550 million phones, out of which about 50% of them are smartphones. And I did not know this number, but there have been 12.5 billion downloads of applications in this country alone. So if you really look at the adoption of technology that's happening in this country, is immense. The way the younger generation, the way the new generation, the new population is actually adopting this is huge, is unprecedented in the world, is unprecedented in the history of this country. Now with that, ability for people to kind of start looking at it, of course we can talk about skills, the skill development, etc., and that's a different subject we can actually look at. But there are certain core technologies that are going to shape and change this economy, this country. And those organizations who want to kind of come from overseas, want to look at investing in India, what they want to do, will probably be surprised and shocked if they use their traditional models to actually drive markets in this emerging economy. And if I look at some of the technologies, which I'm sure you've heard of it, if I look at the mobile internet, the cloud technologies, I look at the automation of knowledge, the amount of knowledge which we have, and how do we automate that, and how do we store that, and how do we digitize that. The digital payment space, I just met a young entrepreneur the other day who's actually picked up 1 million customers through just digital payments. And he's giving a run for money to all the big banks because all he's done is he's removed the surcharge on the credit cards and he's actually rotating money faster than any other bank can do. In 9 months, he's picked up 1 million customers, and the banks are wanting to actually tie up with him. Now, I think those are kinds of destructive, creative work that's beginning to happen, which are actually challenging the models across all businesses. And this guy lives in Bangalore and Whitefield. He's got an office of 20 people, and he's got 3 large banks now trying to say, okay, we want to actually tie up with you. Now, you see the destruction that's happening in every single space. I look at IoT, geographical information systems. The genomics is another huge area which is going to actually make a massive change in this market. I looked at advanced energy systems, though people talk about the EV stuff and the sustainable energy coming in, the renewable energy coming in. But I think for some time to come, you will see the oil, natural gas energy kind of still very, very dominant. And we will see that there will be destructive technologies that will come in where the traditional technologies will probably not be appropriate. And one area is the energy storage, which is the other technology. So if you look at these 10 or 12 technologies are going to really change the game in the future of how these markets are going to start behaving and how these markets are going to start building. Now, what are the sectors really that they're going to work in? You will see financial services, education, healthcare, agriculture, energy, food, to some extent infrastructure. I think all these markets will see adopting the technologies which I mentioned before which actually now will start changing the whole complexion of the markets of how you will actually operate in these markets. So the traditional way of saying, let me build a product, let me put it in the market, and I hope that I'll actually sell, I will actually gain some market share, is probably going to start losing out in terms of the new strategy of growth, profitability is going to be very, very different. So, let's switch to intrapreneurship now. Now, how should organizations start behaving? If that's kind of the overall pie or overall opportunity, given also the challenges of environmental sustainability, our ability to address that properly, and the opportunity is there, how should organizations start behaving? I've got a few of my colleagues sitting from Ingersoll Rand here, and about 5 years ago, we actually carried out an experiment. That's the time when I was at Ingersoll Rand still. We called something called as an entrepreneur creation program within the organization. And what was the entrepreneur creation program? We may be slightly ahead of the curve at that particular point of time, but what we did is we basically stopped hiring management graduates. We said, here is a traditional good old 150-year-old company which basically goes to engineering schools, goes to management institutes, and hires typical management graduates and puts them into this, regular rung of, okay, you be a sales engineer, then you become a sales manager, you become a marketing manager, and blah, 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 and it goes on till you kind of have a structure or a process which basically moves you up. What we said is we're going to actually hire only entrepreneurs. And we said we'll take a risk. We'll take a risk of actually bringing them into the organization, paying them, but teaching them how to become an entrepreneur. So it is a very, very different model that we said that we're going to launch in the organization. An extremely different model. And what did the model do? It brought in about 10 people from premier institutes. We said, and of course the HR head is here, all these people kind of crafted what I call as a psychometric test of, who can be an entrepreneur, who cannot be an entrepreneur. But we selected people who had this fire in them that they can actually go and create something on their own, with no strings attached. And we said, the bottom line is going to be at the end of 2 years, you guys will no longer be employed with the company. You will actually leave the company. But for 2 years, we would actually created you as an entrepreneur. We would have told you how to set up organizations. We would have told you about technology. We would have told you about products. But the rule of the game is you will go to a tier 2 or a tier 3 city and you will set up a business for us, but you will no longer be with the organization. It was a very, very different model that we started experimenting. Basically by saying that let's build entrepreneurs within the organization who can actually take your product or solution, but the bottom line was you go to a tier 2 or a tier 3 city and you start expanding markets there. And at the same time, we launched what we called as an initiative called Convergence. What did Convergence say? Convergence said that you cannot actually go and operate in a market with your standalone product. You got to build value. You got to build solutions. So the whole definition of growing markets through a product-driven strategy turned into creating markets by doing a market solution strategy. So what you were doing is you were creating solutions which had multiple inputs and multiple interventions of multiple technologies and multiple products, but you were actually creating a solution. To give you an example, this company essentially looked at food safety. So you not only had a product from Ingersoll Rand, but you had to understand the supply chain of the food transporting from farm to fork. You needed to work with a logistics company. You needed to work with an automotive company, but somebody had to put this whole thing together. And so the guy at the last mile started putting all these things together to create a solution, but not as much as saying that, okay, I'm going to go and sell an Ingersoll Rand product. But he was now beginning to create solutions for the market as opposed to creating products, as opposed to selling products. So the whole domain or the whole thinking process changed from suggesting that we go from a product-centric strategy to a market solution-centric strategy. And that is where, this whole process kind of started working. And as we kind of did that, we started seeing growth in markets which are very, very different. So the reason why I kind of brought this example to all of you is that as you people come from the corporate world, and you might be dealing in a product line in a certain kind of an approach of driving your solution, a service, is probably not going to be the future. You'll have to think about solutions where you have disparate technologies, disparate markets, disparate service providers, where you bring everything together and actually look at a solution and do it. And the only way that will happen is when you start creating intrapreneurs in your organization. And therefore, the organization structure in the future and the way you're going to actually build organizations will be a hub and spoke model. A hub where you own the brand, you own possibly some amount of technology, but the spokes which actually feed into this would be a very, very unique set of individuals, entrepreneurs who've been created into entrepreneurs, education institutions, research, innovation centers. All these guys will have to be put together to actually create solutions. And therefore, for India, I think in the future, if you're really looking at a $500 billion to $1 trillion market that needs to be addressed, I think the corporate world, the education institutes, this kind of what I would call as an ecosystem that will have to be built by each organization will have to be very unique. And I strongly believe that that's the future in which you will see that this whole entrepreneurship model will evolve. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm sure over tea we're going to have some discussions and some questions and answers. But it's been a pleasure to come here and actually address all of you. Thank you so much again for inviting me. And Pooja, thank you. And the CII, have a great day today. Thank you.
I think an important takeaway that you spoke about would be the ecosystem creation, the whole partnership between corporates and academia. And I'm also pausing to say that the trust those 10 students from those premier institutes would have placed in the organization, knowing fully well that they are being created as entrepreneurs and would not have a job after 2 years, and the faith the organization would have placed in those 10 students, I think it's a big, big learning for all the HR professionals and business leaders sitting in our audience today. Sir, thank you so much again. I would now request Dr. Rao to please hand over a token of appreciation to sir.